What are the biggest challenges military veterans face as they transition to civilian life?
And what kind of resources are available for veterans with disabilities?
This is Enable, the Disability Podcast, where we'll share stories, experiences, support, resources, and more for people with disabilities and different abilities. We are at Enable Podcast on social media. My name is Jeff Herbert.
And my name is Kurt Hauer. We're talking with Scott Kelly, a military veteran and host of At the Water's Edge podcast. Thank you for your service and thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here, gentlemen. Thank you for having me.
Scott, please start off by telling us about yourself and your career.
Sure. So my name's Scott. I live in the Syracuse area. I joined the Army in 2012, commissioning as an infantry officer out of Penn State's ROTC program. I went to Ranger School, Airborne School, Air Assault School, all the typical stuff that infantry officers do. And then got assigned to an infantry battalion at Fort Drum, New York. It was 1st Battalion, 87th Infantry Regiment. Was a rifle platoon leader, an assault platoon leader, and then a heavy weapons company executive officer. 2016 timeframe, I tried out for Special Forces and got selected, and then moved to Fort Bragg in North Carolina to go through the Special Forces qualification course. Did that for a couple of years, and then got assigned to 3rd Special Forces Group, also at Fort Bragg. Was in 3rd Group for a few years after that, and was eventually medically retired out of the Army in March of 2022.
So, Scott, you received a medical retirement from the Army. Can you give us a little bit more insight into that? Tell us what kind of benefits there are for veterans with disabilities.
Sure. So I was medically retired out of the service, which is different than being medically separated. And that's an important distinction for people to understand if they ever find themselves going through the process. So I got hurt going through some training for Special Forces prior to my deployment to Afghanistan in 2020. Deployed to Afghanistan in 2020. Obviously, nothing that was broken before I left got better while I was there, and came back home in early 2021. And a very kindly orthopedic surgeon at Womack Army Medical Center told me that I was no longer physically capable of staying in Special Forces. My back was too messed up. I had developed degenerative disc disease. At this point, walking was challenging. I couldn't dress myself very easily in the morning. Life was difficult. And so I was submitted for evaluation by a medical evaluation board that determined I was no longer physically capable of performing my assigned duties as a captain in Special Forces, which triggered the process for me to get separated from the Army. With that, there's three outcomes. One, the board can decide, or you can fight it and prove that you actually can be rehabilitated and return to service. The other two options are you get medically separated or medically retired. If you're separated, you leave service and you don't get a pension or anything like that. You just get a DD 214 or discharge papers, and you get 6 months severance pay paid out, I believe, as a lump sum. And that's it. What you get from the VA is separate from what you get from the Army. So if you do have a disability rating, which you should, depending on what that rating is, you'll get some monetary compensation from the Department of Veterans Affairs. If you're medically retired, though, you get whatever you get from the VA, and then you also get a small pension. Pension's obviously prorated for your time in service. So mine was prorated for, 10 years in service, I think at a 50% rate. So ends up not being a whole lot, but every bit helps. And what people in that particular situation tend to not understand is that under current Department of Defense rules, you cannot simultaneously get a VA check and your pension. So if you can only get one or the other. And I got some really bad advice from people who did not know the process, but who were formally assigned to guide me through it. So my formal person from the Army who was assigned to me to guide me through this process said, your stuff's messed up enough that you could get medically retired, but then you forego the 6 months of severance pay as a lump sum. And once you're out, you can't get VA disability and you can't get your Army retirement anyway. So it's actually better for you just to be separated, because then you get your 6 month payout and your check from the VA is still going to be more than your Army pension. So don't worry about it. That was really bad advice. And thankfully, I worked with an organization called the CARE Coalition, a nonprofit that helps particularly special operations personnel who are going through the medical retirement process. They assigned me an advocate who explained to me that's only partially true because my injuries were determined to be combat related. There's an exception where you actually can get both. And I was able to apply after I left service to get part of my Army pension back despite receiving a VA check. That over the course of your lifetime is, I don't know how many dollars. So if anyone out there is listening to this and you're getting medically retired out of service and someone's telling you go for separation instead of retirement, if you've got like a tweener case, you're not sure if you're going to meet the requirements for one or the other. Yeah, really look at your own situation and definitely talk to somebody else. You cannot talk to too many people. There are too many nuances to the medical separation process for anyone to really understand it all. You need to talk to multiple sources of information, and you can't rely necessarily on whoever the Army assigns to handle your case. They may or may not know what they're talking about, which is not a great thing to have to tell people, but it's the truth.
Scott, I think that there's maybe a lot of veterans out there that could use this help and information.
Yeah, I definitely think, I met some wonderful people going through the medical retirement process. I met some terrible people going through the medical retirement process in government, wonderful and terrible in government. But it's very helpful anytime you're dealing with a government bureaucracy. Work with a nonprofit that specializes in that, wherever you can find in your area. For me, it was the CARE Coalition. But you will find tremendous resources and knowledge there because they've seen it, they've done it, they lived it. They will often know the personalities at your particular installation and what they're good at and what they're bad at, and they can fill in a lot of those gaps for you. So yeah, shout out to the CARE Coalition. They helped me out tremendously when it came time to transition and navigate the process. If it had not been for them, would have left with a lot less. They were instrumental in me having a successful transition out of the military.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We do have more questions about that, but first I just want to let our listeners know that the reason we found out about you is because you have become a celebrity. A TikTok user filmed someone looking at your resume while at a Jonas Brothers concert that you weren't even at. The video went viral, viewed more than 50 million times, and it led to you meeting the band and Jimmy Fallon on The Tonight Show. So, how does it feel to be famous?
Honestly, it doesn't really feel like I am famous. I get home.
You don't get mobbed at Wegmans?
No, it hasn't happened yet. Hasn't happened yet. There was a lady at the grocery store that was looking at me for a long time, but that might just because I'm funny looking. I'm not sure. So, going on Fallon was great. Being famous on TikTok for a minute, it's fun. But I come home from New York City and I walk in the door and my wife's like, "Hey, welcome home. There's some dirty laundry over there. Your 2-year-old daughter who's doing potty training had an accident. There's some leftover pizza on the counter and you can help me load the car because we got to go visit, her cousin for a birthday party. And by the way, the dog, here's medications over here so you can give them in the morning and I'll see you tomorrow afternoon." So 50 million views doesn't change the fact, when you're a parent and you've got a day job and all that stuff, it's still your day to day is still your day to day.
Well, I think on the Tonight Show, you admitted you didn't even know who the Jonas Brothers were, and what's more, I think you aren't even looking for a job right now.
That both of those statements are true. First time hearing about the Jonas Brothers was because of all of this. My wife had to explain to me who they were and why they're a big deal. And then, I am in an MBA program right now, but was not actively applying for a job at what turns out to be my buddy's company out there in the Buffalo area. Just a recruiter happened to have my resume from probably some networking event as part of the MBA program and saw that I was a veteran in the area and sent it to my buddy to review. And here we are.
That's great. And I also saw that when you were on the show, you used the TV appearance to talk about difficulties for veterans entering civilian life. What are the biggest challenges that they face in that transition?
A lot of that comes down to what point in their military career do they transition out of. You have people that, did their full 20 years of service and, they're expecting to retire. And so they have that long lead time up to it. They've already thought about what they're going to do next. Probably they're walking away with a full pension and benefits for life and all the stuff. So they have some stability, and it's kind of like there's more well-trodden paths to exit after your 20 years of service into other career fields with defense contractors or other types of companies. Then you have your people who leave early in their military career. They signed up, they did their 4 years and that was good for them and they left. And they're still in their early to mid 20s and they're still growing and developing and they're still young enough that they can kind of be an entry level person wherever they go. A lot of the folks who have the most challenges are mid-career transitioners, and they're actually classified as high risk, or one of the factors of being high risk transitioner because you're in your early 30s, you've got a lot of military skills that might not translate to the job market. You're too old to be a new guy, but you're not senior enough to be a senior leader yet. And it's a really rough spot for transitioning. So right out the gate, one of the hardest things to do is find gainful employment where you want to live and figure out what that's going to be. So getting the time in your last 6 months of service or year of service to go get a professional credential that'll help you translate your skills to the civilian world. Any of that stuff, that's kind of like table stakes. You need to have a job when you get out. And there's a lot of programs out there that'll help you at least get that first gig. Might not be the gig you want, but there's a lot of folks out there that'll help you get something. The biggest challenge, especially for folks who, I was medically retired out after 10 years. I thought I was going to do a career in the Army. It's all I've wanted to do since I was a kid. I was in special forces. I was really good at jumping out of airplanes and shooting guns. Like, not a lot of call for that in the civilian world. And I've got degenerative disc disease, which thankfully been well rehabilitated, but I'm not going running and gunning as a contractor for the CIA or any of that stuff either. Like, these things are out for me. So what am I going to do? The biggest challenge was trying to figure out who I was now that I'm no longer, in special forces. Like, I'm no longer that guy. I don't walk around with a uniform that tells me what my identity is on a regular basis. And I spent my entire formative years as a young man in that institution that, defined and messaged that for you the entire way. And I was fully bought into it. Now you got to make that switch, and figuring out what you're going to be next and who you want your family to spend the rest of their lives with is challenging. And as you're trying to figure that out, you're also communicating in real time with your spouse if you have one, because they got to help guide you, and they also have to be patient with you as you figure it out. And there's a lot of love and grace that has to be exchanged back and forth. And it's very emotionally intensive and draining at times. And that is, I have found it to be pretty universal for a lot of mid-career transitioners, especially folks who are making that transition because of a medical issue.
Well, the Enable podcast is somewhat of a community. And one of the things that we like to do is share experiences so others get the help they need. And in your case, are there ways for others to help?
A lot of it comes down to patience and understanding. I went through 18 months of physical therapy, and I worked with like 4 or 5 different physical therapists over the course of that time, and also prior to deploying, and had to figure out like what exact PT exercises actually work for me. All right, how do I fit that into my day? How does that affect the family dynamic? And a lot of that's on me, but then also my family's got to provide that time and space as well, to allow me to sort through that process. And I think one of the difficulties leaving service is that everyone expects you to have a plan day one on what you're going to do next. And it's okay to have a plan for day one. It's also okay for that plan to change the next day. And so if you're working with somebody who's transitioning out of the military and they're figuring that out, just accept whoever they are that day, because it's going to change. It's going to take them a while to settle. And so just meet them where they're at, wherever they are that day. Don't try to give them the greatest life advice in the world. They probably don't want to hear it. But give them space and meet them wherever they are. And it's a process. It takes a couple of years to sort through all that. So give them 2 years of grace and patience. That can be a lot. And don't just go like, oh, they're weird. Let's stop talking to them. They are weird, but weird people can be fun.
Aren't we all?
That's excellent advice, Scott. Thank you. Now, you also host your own podcast, At the Water's Edge. Can you explain what that title means and what kind of topics do you explore?
Sure. So there was an old phrase in American politics that politics stops at the water's edge. And we've lost that. I served during the global war on terror, where for most American politicians and policymakers, the war was a political football to be used for talking points domestically. It wasn't something they're actively engaged in or paying attention to. They threw tons of money at defense contractors. They did a bunch of recruiting efforts. They had a professional military that kind of mitigated the effects of the domestic population because they weren't necessarily directly tied to the war itself. And I got to see the end result of that firsthand in northern Afghanistan when I was leading the crisis response group for Regional Targeting Team North from mid 2020 to early 21. And so the podcast is my attempt to have the types of conversations that inform people on how defense policy and defense strategy actually work, how it's actually implemented, and from a somewhat non-traditional lens. People think national security and they think of the military, of course, critical national security. But there's multiple elements of national power. You have diplomacy, information, military, economic. The dime model is kind of the classical model for elements of national power. So I try to talk to folks from across those different elements, experts in their fields, and get their take on what's going on with national security and foreign policy.
Well, thank you for taking time to share with us, Scott. It means a great deal. And do you have any closing thoughts you'd like to share?
I've been incredibly grateful for all the love and support that I've received since I made my transition out of the military. And I gotta say, this past week and a half of being TikTok famous and going on national media, it has supercharged every single part of my life. The podcasts, some of my professional pursuits, but also the amount of love and support that I've received out there. So for veterans who are out there who are going through the transition process, and it just feels wrong and it feels weird, and maybe like you haven't been blown up by an IED, you don't have a Purple Heart, like you don't have physical scars showing that you've been hurt, and you maybe haven't even unpacked your own stuff, and you don't even realize that you might have a few issues of your own that you got to do, which everyone has something. It's okay if this all feels weird and it all feels wrong. It's not you. It's just genuinely a rough process. And please just talk to somebody else who has gone through it. You don't even need to talk to them about going through it. Just find somebody, anybody to talk to who has gone through it and build that relationship, because you will land in a good place if you go through the transition process with the right relationships. It's hard to make the process easier, but you can make it much more successful.
That's great advice. Thank you, Scott. Thank you again for joining us. This is Enable, the Disability Podcast. We love to share different stories because even when it feels like it, you're not alone. We're not defined solely by the things we can't do when there's so many things we can do.
Yeah, so please share this podcast with your friends and family so we can share more stories of people with different abilities that bring us all together. Thank you.